Hello, this is the RPG Crawler, and it is time once again for Indie Game Friday, where each week I take a look at a different independent computer role-playing game. This week I'm looking at a tactical RPG based and loosely based on Arthurian lore, Sword Legacy Omen. Developed by Firecast Studio and Fableware Narrative Design and published by Team 17 Digital, it was released on Steam back in August of 2018. Sword Legacy Omen is a turn-based tactical role-playing game in which you play Uther during a troubled time in a fantasy version of Britain. Gathering a team of characters vaguely reminiscent of characters from Arthurian myth together, you follow a progress of a central story involving political machinations, curses, and outright war, moving from combat scenario to combat scenario and occasionally getting new characters and picking up gear from various settlements. In terms of plot, you play Uther, a knight in service to Lord Leof of Mercia. When Princess Igraine is kidnapped during an assault, Uther sets out with the Cambion Merlin and page Duane to uncover what happened to Igraine and take vengeance on whoever was responsible for the death of Lord Leof. All along the way, he picks up various allies, assembling a team to take on this challenge. In terms of gameplay, you're introduced to the mechanics over several missions, but there are three basic modes of play. There is the map screen, where you may select scenarios, acquire skills, and purchase gear at settlements. Then there's exploration and combat modes, both of which are available on the individual scenario maps. In exploration mode, you may freely wander the scenario map, encountering NPCs, poking around for clues, uncovering interactables, and so forth. As soon as you come within range of an enemy, however, the game goes into a turn-based combat mode. Before we get into those, let's take a look at the general character stats. Characters tend to be very loosely based on characters from Arthurian Legend, as I said. Each one has 8 basic ability scores: body, which represents health; attack, which determines the damage they do; defense, that determines their defense from attack and their chance to block; willpower, that functions as morale; action points, that determine how far a character can move and how much they can do; efficiency, that increases the chance of applying effects produced by weapons or spells; resistance, that decreases the chance of those effects being applied to the character in question; and finally, crit chance, which is your basic critical chance. Characters also get talents, which are unique to each character. They generally have very specific combat effects, which are either passive or trigger innately. Characters can also equip up to 4 skills and to 4 pieces of equipment. Skills need to be unlocked with a renown, which I'll get to in a little bit, and vary between active skills that must be triggered during combat and passive skills that are just passively triggered. Each character has their own unique skill set. Equipment slots are limited. Each character can equip 1 weapon, 1 armor, and then 2 artifacts, which may vary between other pieces of armor, magical charms, unique tools, and so forth. Each item may limit what classes can use it, which effectively ties it to certain characters or character groups, and may provide bonuses to certain stats. It should be noted that items generally don't have intrinsic stats based on their type. For instance, weapons don't necessarily have a damage rating, armor doesn't necessarily have a flat defense rating, although weapons usually boost attack. In this way, you can select combinations of gear that max out very specific stats if you're looking to do so. Finally, there's a general party inventory and a series of item hotslots that are shared among the entire party. You can place consumable items in these slots, and any character that has sufficient action points during their turn can use them. As far as game modes go, let's take a look at the Overworld Map first, since it's the simplest one. This basically presents a map of Britain broken into the various kingdoms, with encounter spots and settlements that you've uncovered and mapped out, connected with the paths needed to get from one to the other. This map also allows you to access in-game settings menu, in-game help, the journal where you can keep track of quests and lore that you've uncovered, and the character sheet, or the party character sheet rather. On the party sheet, you can look at each individual character's statistics in turn and their individual character sheet slot, as well as the overall party inventory. You can also see the party's overall gold and their total renown. Renown is gained for defeating opponents, solving scenarios, uncovering lore and such, and basically functions as a shared experience pool. While on the Overworld Map, you can unlock individual character skills using the Total Renown pool, which means that you may improve character skills regardless of whether they entered into a combat or not, and yet you also have to choose between advancing 1 or 2 character skills or spreading the skill unlocks out more evenly. On the Overworld Map, you can journey back and forth along the path between settlements and campsites. Campsites generally allow you to camp, which restores some of your body and willpower, although it does cost supplies, while settlements allow for more options. Settlements may offer an inn where characters can pay to rest even for more body and willpower gain, as well as purchase various supplies and thieving tools. The apothecary allows for the purchase of various potions and other consumables. The blacksmith allows for the purchase of various weapons and armor, as well as armor-like artifacts, while the black market offers purchase of other artifacts and consumables. Settlements may also have associated quests that don't trigger immediately on entry. These are listed with their details in a settlement screen and offer the option to begin the quest at any time. Generally, when you uncover new campsites and settlements on the map, they will usually have some sort of combat or exploration encounter associated with them, which must be undertaken in order to advance the story and unlock further areas. After an area is unlocked, you may return to it at a later date, but moving back and forth along the path to prior settlements may trigger random combat encounters, which must be engaged in before moving on. Once you enter into an area, you are either in combat or exploration mode, depending on the scenario. Both take place on the same scenario map screen, which is tile-based with movement measured in squares. Exploration mode doesn't necessarily limit the amount of movement that you can do all at once, and when you move one character in exploration mode, the rest follow automatically. There may be interactive elements on the map marked by white icons that allow you to inspect, search, or loot an area. These may only become evident when you're quite close to them, so it does encourage you to poke around a bit. However, even in exploration mode, you may attack certain objects on the map, which may clear paths, uncover loot, or spread hazards on the map. If you advance close enough to uncover a story element during exploration mode or a combat, it will generally automatically trigger a cutscene, so there should be really little to worry about missing critical story points. During combat, things are a little bit different. At this point, fights break out into a turn-based combat mode, and movement becomes limited by a character's action points. During combat, you can alternate turns with your enemies as a whole. During your particular turn, however, you can select any of your characters and move them forward and execute actions. At any time, you can switch characters, so if you want, you can move one character in position and have another character take their action, and then go back and move the first one to take their actions, as long as you have the action points to do it. During each character's turn, they get the full number of action points that their stats allow. Moving generally takes one action point per tile, and each character can execute their actions and skills that they have equipped, each of which costs a number of action points. Skills beyond basic attacks also generally have a cooldown time as well, indicating a number of turns that must pass before they can be used again. Ending a turn while action points are left may give a temporary defensive boost. Characters can also consume willpower during a turn, which costs a point of willpower but gives a bonus to attack, defense, and action point total. They may also take an overwatch position, which effectively readies an attack in a certain direction for when enemies come into range. Movement may also put a character near to cover. Cover can also provide defensive bonuses or make it impossible for certain attacks to target them. There are a number of terrain effects which may be unleashed on a battlefield, either due to skills or more commonly due to bursting certain barrel and urn types. These unleash fields of fire, poison, oil, etc., which may damage characters entering them, inflict status effects on them, or slow them down. There may also be traps, which usually can be readily avoided, but forced movement may bump you into them, so be aware of positioning. In fact, be aware of positioning in general, because forced movement can be very effective in terms of throwing characters into barrels of burning oil, for instance. After movement is done, you can change a character's facing, which can be important to minimize flanking and back attacks. And since some characters benefit more from flanking and back attacks, setting them up for your own benefit is extraordinarily useful. Generally, you're limited to 4 characters active during any scenario, so this can be a little bit challenging to set up, but it is worth doing when it can be done. Damage a character takes is removed from their body stat, and when their body reaches 0, then they are out of that particular scenario. They are not, however, dead, so if you beat the scenario, you will see that they are now marked seriously wounded, which can reduce their stat total overall until you rest either at a camp or at an inn. After a scenario is done, there may be a single combat or a mixture of combat encounters and exploration, etc. Either way, you are presented with a victory screen that shows a summary of what you found, what enemies defeated, and what items and renown you earned during that scenario. All in all, the gameplay is actually pretty decent from a tactical perspective. Graphically, the game kind of walks that line, having a sort of comic art style to it that's pretty decent overall, although it may not agree to some. This is reflected in the character models as well. The music is decent, although it may wear on one just due to how much time is spent in combat. The interface is fairly easy to grasp, although it can be a little bit minimalistic in some ways. Combat itself can be a little bit spiky due to various factors in each scenario, leading to a sense of it either being just a little too easy in some instances and a little bit too rough in some areas. A lot of this is just coming down to bad luck, but some of it's due to the way that fights are organized, especially as you go later on in the game. Overall, I think that the balance is just right, but your mileage is probably going to vary depending on your tolerance for this sort of thing. Expect to see a number of fights as the game goes on where you'll actually just need to redo them, once to see where enemies are actually located and then another to actually succeed at it. And it's important that you enjoy the combat if you're going to get into this one because so much of the game revolves around it. Sword Legacy Omen does have a pretty decent storyline all in all, although the writing can be suspect in areas. But when I say it is loosely based on Arthurian myth, I'm actually being pretty generous there. The characters have names you might recognize, and there's familiar names in the setting, but the timeline, overall story, and such is a little bit of a departure, which can be good since it keeps things a little bit original, but it can also be bad if you're expecting something more true to the source material. It is basically a pretty decent, albeit somewhat generic, dark fantasy storyline where the Arthurian legend kind of lightly spread over it. I must say that the game itself is incredibly linear as well. You basically march through scenarios in order with pretty much no branching. So again, if you're in it for the combat, which is pretty solid, that's not so bad, but if you're expecting to have choices that really meaningfully impact the storyline, then this one's probably not for you. I have to say that it really doesn't detract as much from this game as it might from some others due to the linear nature of the story overall, but because there's so much focus on creating a tactical team and such, you know, if you're into that, that'll probably go ahead and save it for you. I do like the renown system, which makes you prioritize which characters to build, and the fact that while there are enough skills to make a difference, they don't have too many means that you really aren't as limited as you might be in other games that use a similar kind of system. After all, you can always go back and hit a few random encounters from some old campsites if necessary if you want a little bit of extra renown. That does add a bit of tedium, however, especially since the randomized battles are just so generic and similar. They're not really fun. Overall, it is not a bad game. The story is decent, the art is solid, and the gameplay itself I enjoyed, although I can see where others might not. But it is very linear, and the combats can be a little bit luck dependent. So while I do recommend it, I do have to limit my recommendation to turn-based tactical combat fans, and even that, definitely wait until it's on sale unless you've got a lot of cash to burn. And on that note, I will leave it off here. This has been the RPG Crawler with Indie Game Friday, Sword Legacy Omen. As always, I'll put a link to the Steam page in the description below. If you like what you've seen, remember to leave a like, comment if you got any feedback, and subscribe for more RPG content both tabletop and computer. Until next time, take care and goodbye. And if you're still watching this far, I'd like to take a moment to thank those who have supported this channel via Patreon or direct donations throughout the years, without which this channel could not have lasted as long as it has. For those who are feeling particularly generous, you can still support my work through Patreon and now through Subscribestar as well, through the links in the description below.